Money. Money.
Today, I thought I would talk to you about how to take title. Now, what's the best way to hold title in real estate? The answer depends on the property owner, your property owner's personal situation and real estate goals. Is the major goal to avoid probate costs, delays when sole owner dies? Do parents want to be sure that their adult children receive the property without probate? Are there multiple unrelated owners, such as investors? And today I'm going to go through some pros and cons of 5 most widely used methods of holding title to real estate. Not giving title advice. You need to understand what your options are and get some professional advice, but I just want to kind of break it down here for you. Sole ownership. You're single. If you're single, you probably hold title in your real estate in your name alone. This is called sole ownership or ownership of servantee. This ownership method is also available when married persons take title in his or her name alone. Usually the spouse is asked to sign a quitclaim deed that gives up any ownership claim. Now, sole ownership might be appropriate when a husband invests in a fixer-up properties and his wife isn't involved in the real estate investments. Sole ownership disadvantages include lack of tax advantages and the inclusion of probate cost and delays when the owner dies. But most single owners use this title method because they are not aware of better alternative options. Now, next is tenants in common. 2 or more realty co-owners, usually not married to each other, often take title as tenants in common. Now, as a tenant in common advantage, each owner can own a specific unequal share. For an example, one might own 25% investment, the other 50% share. You can break it into more than that if you have more people owning the home, and actually 25% share, it means the other one will have 75% share. Now, when one tenant in common dies, the share passes according to the terms that the tenant will. So for any reason, tenancy in common is especially popular in second marriages because the co-owners will their shares to the children with a prior marriage. This can become a disadvantage, however, if the inheriting co-owner doesn't get along with the other tenants in common. Also, tenancy in common shares are subject to probate court cost and delays. Now, further tenancy in common disadvantage, also applicable to joint tenancy, is that one tenant in common can force a sale of the property even when the other co-owner do not want to sell the property. Such a legal action is called partition lawsuit, in which the court orders the property sold by the proceeds divided among the tenants in common or joint tenants. Now, next option is joint tenancy with right of survivalship. So the most popular ways for husband and wives to hold title is joint tenancy, which is right of survivorship. All joint tenants must take title at the same time and hold the same interest. Now, when one joint tenant dies, the surviving joint tenant automatically receives title without probate cost and delays. All that is usually required is a copy of the death certificate and the survivor to record an affidavit of survivorship. Now, the deceased will have no effect on the joint tenancy property. With joint tenancy, one joint tenant can convey his or her share without the tenant's approval, thus ending the joint convey his or her share, creating a joint tenancies in common. Now, I mentioned earlier, a joint tenant can bring a partition lawsuit to force a sale of the property in the other owners if they don't want to sell the property. Next, I want to break down community property. Now, in community property, husband and wives who own real estate in Washington and many other states take community property. Each spouse owns 50% of the property, and the shares can be passed by will to either surviving spouse for someone else, such as a child. A major tax advantage for community property assets, will to the surviving spouse, is a new stepped-up base to market value on the date of the death for 100% of the property's market value. So in 1987, the IRS extended this community property step-up market value basis to husband and wives holding joint tenancy titles in community property states. However, requiring spouses are acknowledged to put in writing each other before the other spouse dies that the joint tenancy property is also community property. Last is living trust. Probably the best method without giving advice, of holding title to homes and other major assets is the revocable living trust to avoid probates and costs and delays. Now, the only disadvantage are the legal fees up to $1,000 depending on the property and the living trust until the death or the disability of the trust creator. The home and the royalty bank accounts and stocks and bonds can be managed and bought and sold as before. Now, since the living trust is revocable, it can amend the circumstances changes. However, if a trustor becomes independent and unable to manage affairs, the alternative trustees, such as a spouse or an adult child, take over the management of the trust assets. When the trust dies, the living trust assets are disputable according to the trust terms. Now, privacy is a major living trust advantage. Unlike a will, which becomes part of the public probate file of the deceased, the living trust term remains private. A lot of information to go through in a few-minute money chat, but it's great information. And it's important to understand when you're purchasing real estate that you've got different options and how you want to take title, and you just want to make sure that you understand what those options are and you choose the best way to take title for you and your family. Coming up next on the Money Hour, do you own real estate property in King County, and how are your property taxes assessed? Lloyd Hart, King County Assessor, right here on 1150 AM KKNW after this short break.